India sounds alarm on Chinese dumping as U.S. trade war escalates under Trump, as trade tensions between China and the United States intensify under the renewed leadership of Donald Trump. India finds itself caught in the economic crossfire. With Chinese exports facing aggressive new tariffs in the U.S., India is bracing for an influx of heavily discounted Chinese goods, a development that could severely disrupt its domestic manufacturing ecosystem. At the center of this brewing storm is a growing concern in India over dumping, a practice where a country exports goods at prices below domestic production costs to outcompete local industries in foreign markets. While China has faced such accusations for years, the scale and speed at which it is now redirecting its exports, largely due to Trump's protectionist policies, have set off alarm bells in New Delhi. Textile industry under siege in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu. Once bustling spinning mills are now running below capacity. For Thirunavkarsu, a 64-year-old mill owner, the signs of trouble are unmistakable. His warehouse, once quickly cleared by consistent orders from local garment factories, is now filling up with unsold viscose yarn, a vital component in India's textile production chain. "The yarn is just sitting here," he says with concern. "Orders have dropped by nearly 40% in the last month alone." The reason? Chinese producers are now selling viscose yarn at prices up to Ara 15, 0.18 per kilo cheaper, effectively undercutting Indian manufacturers. With China's goods shut out of the American market, Indian industries are facing an unrelenting flood of these discounted imports. Local industry associations like the South India Spinners Association warn that the threat is growing. Nearly 50 small spinning mills in Palipalayam, Karur, and Tirupur are already slowing production, says Jagadesh Chandran, a representative of the association. If things don't improve, more shutdowns are imminent. Chinese assurances fall short. China's ambassador to India, Xu Feihong, has tried to allay Indian fears. Writing in the Indian Express, he assured that China has no intention of dumping its products or destabilizing India's economy. "We will not engage in market dumping or cutthroat competition," he wrote, adding that China seeks to increase imports of high-quality Indian goods. But words offer little comfort to Indian policymakers and businesses who are watching their domestic industries being slowly eroded. These fears aren't unfounded. China is the world's largest exporter of industrial goods, ranging from textiles and chemicals to electronics and heavy machinery. And with vast manufacturing overcapacity, especially as U.S. tariffs bite, China has every incentive to find alternative markets to offload its surplus. Dumping concerns spread beyond textiles. India's concerns are not limited to textiles. A growing number of sectors are witnessing a similar trend. Steel, chemicals, solar cells, and electronics are all seeing a rise in Chinese imports that threaten local manufacturers. For example, in an effort to shield its steel sector, India recently imposed a 12% safeguard duty on select steel imports, targeting a surge of cheap steel, largely originating from China. Despite these defensive measures, India remains heavily dependent on Chinese intermediate goods, the raw materials or components used to manufacture finished products. This dependency has limited India's ability to counter Chinese dominance effectively. In March 2025 alone, imports from China surged by 25%, mainly driven by electronics, battery components, and solar technologies. A swelling trade deficit and a strategic dilemma. India's trade deficit with China, a long-standing concern, has now ballooned to an eye-watering $100 billion. This imbalance reflects not just skewed trade flows, but a deeper structural weakness in India's manufacturing base. Despite Prime Minister Narendra Modi's high-profile Make in India and production-linked incentive (PLI) schemes, India has struggled to reduce its reliance on Chinese inputs. China's dominance in intermediate goods supply chains means that India ends up importing even more when it tries to manufacture more, explains Ajay Srivastava, founder of the Global Trade Research Initiative, GTRI. This isn't just a trade imbalance, it's a structural red flag. Indeed, India's exports to China have not only failed to keep pace with imports, they've declined, falling below 2014 levels. This is despite a weaker Indian rupee, which should ideally have made Indian goods more competitive abroad. A broader global concern. India is far from alone. Japan-based brokerage house Nomura recently warned that the global economy could see a widespread slowdown in manufacturing as Chinese goods displace domestic products in multiple countries. Their data shows that even before Trump's latest tariff barrage, Chinese companies had already been aggressively exporting at low prices across Asia and Europe. The European Union has since entered discussions with Beijing, demanding firm guarantees against dumping, while countries across Southeast Asia are beginning to scrutinize imports more closely. Policy response: a race against time. In response to these developments, India's Trade Ministry has launched a dedicated task force to monitor the inflow of cheap Chinese goods. Its quasi-judicial investigative wing is now probing suspected dumping practices in multiple sectors, including textiles, steel, chemicals, and renewable energy. However, analysts warn that reactive policies may not be enough. India needs a forward-looking industrial strategy, says Professor Biswajit Dar, an expert in international trade. The focus should be on strengthening domestic supply chains, developing value-added sectors, and reducing import dependency. Otherwise, any shock from China will always hurt disproportionately. Calls are also growing louder for India to engage China diplomatically and economically. This is the moment to open high-level dialogue with Beijing on trade dumping, says Dar. Many Western countries are already doing it. India must too. A moment of opportunity, or risk ironically, the very crisis threatening India could also be a rare opportunity. With multinational companies like Apple and Tesla accelerating plans to diversify production away from China, India could position itself as a key alternative. Already, iPhones bound for U.S. markets are increasingly being assembled in India, though they still rely heavily on Chinese components. To capitalize on this opening, India will have to address its core structural issues: underdeveloped supply chains, slow infrastructure development, lack of scale, and weak R&D investment. Akash Prakash of Amansa Capital puts it succinctly: Indian companies are hesitant to invest because they fear being swamped by Chinese imports. Until this fear is addressed through better policy support and trade protections, private investment will remain subdued. The road ahead for India is complex, balancing trade diplomacy with China while protecting domestic industry is no small task. But as Trump's tariffs shift the global trade map once again, India must quickly define its strategy. Whether that means stricter trade barriers, deeper industrial reforms, or assertive negotiations with Beijing, one thing is clear: doing nothing is no longer an option. India must act decisively, not just to protect its economy today, but to shape its industrial future in the world of tomorrow.